Good evening, and we'd like to open up the Bedford Township Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for November 4th, 2019. Call the meeting in order, and I would like the members to introduce themselves, please.
Kyle Dersh, citizen at large.
Jake Lake, Vice Chair.
George Welling, Chair.
Tom Zebek, liaison to the planning.
Rick Steiner, Township Board Liaison.
Jody Rector, Planning and Zoning.
Dennis Kohler, Building Inspector.
Phil Goldsmith, Township Attorney.
Karen Kincaid, Planning and Zoning.
And Mr. Dersh, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well done. Hey, Karen, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Dersh,
Aye.
Mr. Lake,
Here.
Mr. Zebek,
Here.
Mr. Steiner,
Aye.
Mr. Welling,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
We'll make a motion, we approve the agenda.
Second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And now I'm looking for somebody to make a motion to approve the minutes for last month's meeting of October 7th.
We'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of our October 7th meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
No? None. Thank you. Well, let's go into new business. We're going to ask for a motion to open the public hearing regarding the appeal of the Crabb Road Investment LLC having to do with property 5802-035-001-10.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing on the above-mentioned property.
Support?
Open and supported. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Karen, would you please give us the details on this?
Yes. Again, the applicant is Crabb Road Investment, William R. Johns, out of Clinton Township, Michigan, 7177 Crabb Road, I-1, planned industrial park, and the current uses for industrial, approximately 13.15 acres, and to allow a gravel drive and maneuvering pads. The subject 13.15 plus or minus acre industrially zoned parcel with approximately 590 feet of frontage on Crabb Road is located east of the existing railroad spur, which runs the entire width of the subject property's west boundary. The property owner has been approached by the Ann Arbor Railroad and one of their tenants seeking a site to create a temporary transfer location for the offloading of crude oil. The offloaded material would then be transported to a refinery in Toledo, Ohio. At this time, the use commitment from the Ann Arbor Railroad and their tenant is for a 3 to 5 year time period that is anticipated to consist of the offloading of approximately 10 rail cars that would require approximately 50 trucks per day entering and leaving the subject site at any given time. Due to the proposed temporary use, the applicant is seeking a variance to install a 24-foot wide gravel unloading area or drive along the east side of the rail spur with a truck turnaround located at the north end and one located at the south end of the unloading area to provide an area for trucks to circle around to make access to the exit gravel drive and exit the site. While the use is permitted per section 400.1401.14, and I won't go through all of those uses, loading and unloading areas are required to consist of concrete or asphalt hard surface in accordance with section 400.1906.9. Again, and we included the language requiring that. It should be noted an existing concrete loading and unloading pad located along the southeast portion of the rail spur was installed as needed for an earlier approved site plan use and will remain as installed. This, as stated in the letter submitted by Jim Jacobs of James S. Jacobs Architects, the proposed temporary use does not require the same tolerance of level grade and jack pad support for detached trailers as was required for the previous permanent use. While the property owner has attempted to obtain a more permanent commitment from the Ann Arbor Railroad and their tenant, at this time the proposed use is anticipated to be a 3 to 5 year commitment. The applicant has acknowledged if the use becomes a permanent or long-term situation, the stone installed would provide a base for any permanent hard surface that might be appropriate in the future. Reference shall be made to the James S. Jacobs Architect letter for additional provided information specific to the site. At this time, no letters or calls of objection have been received. However, a call of no objection was received from Mr. Stover, of the Consumers Energy Site property owner, and a contractor for Buckeye Pipeline, which is located on the east side of Crabb Road, stated they have no concerns regarding the proposed use. Should the request be granted, the following variance is required. Allow a gravel surface 24 feet wide by nearly the entire length of the rail spur to include a turnaround area to the north and a turnaround area to the south to serve as truck maneuverability area for existing purposes, for exiting purposes.
Thank you very much, Karen. Is there a representative for Crabb Road Investments?
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Jim Jacobs, 25 Washington Street in Monroe, here tonight to represent the developer in this instance.
Anything to add to Karen's description?
I have some photographs that might be helpful in understanding the transfer method. That if you'd like, I can pass those around now, and then I can answer some questions. I'm not sure if you received these two sketches in your packet of a similar site in Dundee. Okay, so this is some photographs related to that site, the way that they use it, which is our understanding of what Ann Arbor and its tenant are proposing for their type of transfer. I also have some other,
Excuse me, Jim, will you pass those around?
Oh, sure.
These specifics ones.
okay.
This is the Dundee site.
And then these are some other similar methods, so we have not been able to confirm if they're gonna use that trailer type or a truck is their method on this site for transferring from the rail to that, but the style of transfer would be similar to one of these, is our understanding.
Well, right now, we are in the open hearing. Is there anybody that you want to speak on this matter, sir? I don't believe so. If you're going to speak, you have to go to the podium. Name and address, please.
Randy Root, property owner of 7170 Crabb. And I think I'm on the opposite side of the road from where this is all taking place. Is that correct?
Which side of Crabb are you on?
We would be on the
He's on the east.
east
East side.
side of Crabb.
This is behind themselves.
Yeah, south of Stearns, I thought I heard you say, and
South of
west.
Stearns, on the west side of Crabb.
Yes.
So it's kitty corner from where we
Yeah.
are. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I just come here to get educated on it. I had no complaint, no idea what was going on. I just put that interest. Okay?
Well, thank you very much. And seeing that he's the last one in the audience there, I'm going to entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I didn't think so. Okay, any more discussion or questions for the applicant?
I have actually a question for township members here. The requirement around asphalt or concrete in the ordinance, do we know why we have that requirement?
Good question. No. I think in part it's for stability, it's for access for emergency vehicles. It's also to go along with stability so that you have a sound base for the parking of motor vehicles, for the parking of trucks. You don't have a rutted area, things of that nature. Dennis can probably add to that with his years of experience, but primarily.
Accessibility, people's walking on gravel compared to walking on pavement, access, wheelchairs, accessibility issues.
Which wouldn't apply in this particular case.
Yeah.
But that's where they don't need it here.
Yeah. In this instance, Mr. Chairman, those typical reasons don't necessarily apply. It would be
Right.
used for truck traffic only to access the railroad spur. When I looked at this, my main concern, and I've already addressed this with Mr. Jacobs, is that what safeguards will be incorporated into the site in the event of a of an accident, a spill, that sort of thing. Will a containment area be required? Those sorts of things. That would be outside our purview, except to the extent that what I would recommend, if the BZA tonight grants the requested variance, that it be granted subject to site plan review and approval by the Planning Commission relative to containment of any potential crude oil spill and other site plan concerns that would be found in our zoning ordinance that would pertain to an operation of this sort. Otherwise, it's the area is zoned properly for it. Railroad spurs are not all that common, and it's in our industrial park. So those are all things for your discussion here tonight that when I looked at it that jumped out at me as. But the big thing was containment in the event of a spill, and Mr. Jacobs can speak to that, and I'm sure he'll be speaking to that in front of our Planning Commission when and if the time comes.
Mr. Steiner?
Well, Phil, you took a little bit of my thunder away there, but first off, going back to what Mr. Lake said, these trucks are going to weigh 80,000 pounds when they're gross loaded. So, trucks do tear up gravel, like you said, potholes, things like that. Initially, I wouldn't have a problem with it. You're going to have a pretty good solid base there. You're going to have quite a few tons of gravel tossed in there to make that happen. Turning around, that's one thing, it tears it up. If there's any trucks that are ever parked possibly with crude on them waiting for a new tractor, you got those landing gears, those come down. So I would hope they would be thinking enough that they must drop those landing gear on the cement pad. Other than that, it's going to go right down through. Man, I've seen trailers go right down through blacktop when it's nice and hot out. And of course, over there, I'm not sure exactly what that ground's like, but it's probably fairly soft when it gets wet. So it's something to definitely look into. They would also have to maintain that as well, as Mr. Goldsmith said. If the fire department or emergency crews ever had to get back in there, we wouldn't want them to be stuck. I do have a couple of questions regarding the containment, because that was on my list. What kind of plan they would have in their containment? What kind of regulations are they going to need to follow under EPA? Do they have a such as a Chemtrack phone number that they call if there's ever an emergency spill, et cetera? Do they have any SDS data that they have to take care of? That stands for a safety data sheet for hazardous product or dangerous goods. I would imagine they have to have some kind. It's probably considered, I don't want to say non-haz, but dangerous goods, et cetera, because you can have two different classifications there. And I did have a question for Mr. Goldsmith. If we were inclined to do something like this and give some kind of approval with what you said, site plan review with the Planning Commission and review of any other items that might fall within their purview, would it be allowable that if we said, because it says 3 to 5 years in the request, could we do a 3-year and then have an administrative review with building, fire, and planning, that if we went through years 4 and 5, that they wouldn't have to necessarily come back here? The fire department could go out and inspect the site with planning and stuff, that they could go ahead and administratively give them the 4 to 5 year, as long as we had it in the language in a motion.
I see no reason why you couldn't, because you are a quasi-judicial body, and by law, you can attach reasonable regulations to the granting of a variance if it's moved. If someone moves to grant it, you could do that. And quite frankly, I guess it makes sense, perfect sense to do it, to see how the operation is running and to see if there's any issues. And if everything is fine, then it could continue. If not, it should come back here for further review.
And then, of course, I would probably say with that, all that said, that I would definitely want especially the fire department to review the site annually, as they do with all other businesses, to make sure that they're in compliance with any kind of fire hazards or emergency hazards that could come up.
Well, you raised some really good points. There are other agencies that may and probably will review this other than this BZA and the Bedford Township Planning Commission. You mentioned the EPA, and there's also other federal standards that coincide with trucking and hazardous materials, or, as you said, there are certain classifications, other classifications. So you can make it subject to all of the approval of all agencies that have jurisdiction over this type of operation. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, Jim, one of the things in your report called out the fact that the railroad wouldn't allow within their right-of-way the construction of a drive constructed of concrete or blacktop. My question, Dennis and I were talking about that today, Dennis Kohler, and a question came up between the two of us, and that is, does the railroad have jurisdiction over this spur, or is that considered to be on private property? Is there a railroad right-of-way for the spur, and would they have authority to control what would be within that right-of-way, if you know?
Our understanding, and we've heard it through a railroad representative, I'm not sure that that's the official word yet, but the initial discussions we've had with them, and on the original survey work, it shows a railroad right-of-way through there, so our understanding is railroad controls that right-of-way. So the ability to offload on either side, because it does cross property line to offload onto this property. So they have the authority to write that contract without going to the other property owners to do so.
Okay, all right.
How we get an official answer to do that, we're working towards having something in writing to bring back with site plan review.
Okay, so that, that may be a practical difficulty that would be considered by the board here tonight in their deliberations if the railroad wouldn't approve the installation of a permanent drive, at least at this point, within their right-of-way, but they would approve a gravel?
Yes,
Okay,
that's our understanding.
because, well, getting into your area of expertise, but Mr. Steiner raised some really important points, and that is to carry the weight that will be carried by those trucks when they're loaded. They're going to have to put in a pretty good base to facilitate trucks in and out.
Yeah. So what we would do in that regard, which we have not taken the steps until we know that that's the direction we're headed, is have some soil borings done with a geological report that would tell us what the soil makeups are, and then determine what the depth of stone base for both a concreted or asphalt pavement or a section without paving would be. And it's going to be probably a mix of stone sizes with some bigger stuff at the bottom. Depending on the soil makeups, there could be some mud mats that go along with that too to help add the strength there. But yes, certainly we'll need to have that report to be able to make those educated design decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll make one more comment, and then I'll be quiet. I don't want to monopolize the
I hear you.
discussion. And that is, and it's mentioned in the Mr. Jacobs' report, and I think you ought to, in the event someone makes a motion to approve this variance, that either the railroad or who's ever in charge of the drive or the property have adequate wheel wash facilities available so that we're not tracking mud or stone or what have you out onto either, is it Reed Road that's Crabb? But is it going to be off of Crabb, or will it be on,
Crabb.
all on Crabb? Okay, so it doesn't get tracked out onto Crabb Road. That's just another thought I had in terms of a condition, a reasonable condition to attach to a motion.
So that goes through Bozell's driveway then?
Yes.
Yeah, because I was back there and it was getting pretty dark by the time I could get back there, so.
Before anybody else has any comments, I do have a little concern about Crabb Road itself. That's an awful lot of weight going up and down that road. And I guess I would like to have planning look into that when they're trying to make their decision about how this should go. You know, so if they can make a note, if we can make a note about that, I'm worried about the road itself. Mr. Steiner?
Well, just an FYI, that road was, Crabb Road was beefed up some, if you remember when we were attracting Syncreon.
Right.
And that road had been beefed up some at that time because of the number of trucks and everything going through there. Those trucks, on an average, are probably not 80,000.
That's right.
I would imagine those trucks are probably hauling, I'm just going to guess more like a 60,000 or 65,000 max, but I would imagine these crews are going to be topped out because
That's,
it's not going to take, I mean, you wonder how I know a lot of this stuff. I hauled fuel for a year and a half, so
okay.
going back into those days, I mean, we could haul almost 9,000 gallons of gas, about 7,800 gallons of diesel. Crude, I don't know how many gallons, you're probably lucky to get 4,000 gallons or maybe 5, I don't know, on a truck.
It's 2.5 trucks per car to offload it. I don't know what the.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, because I mean, rail cars, they're 160, 180,000 gross, et cetera, so I'm not really sure, but, so I know the gallons wise, they're not gonna be up there, but the weights will definitely hit that 80,000.
Well, at one time, when they redid Stearns and Secor, that type of thing, and they had all the concrete trucks coming through to work on another road, there was a problem there. So I'm just asking that they keep that in mind.
Yep.
Did you have a comment?
I had some more questions, or I don't know, maybe food for thought here, but I'm very interested on what would be a long-term agreement in this case. So it's already 3 to 5 years. In some opinion, that's a long-term agreement. Just some quick math, 50 trucks per day entering and leaving the subject site, that's 54,000 trucks. If this particular company was making $100 per truck, that's over $5.5 million in the course of 3 years. What would it take to put in, to follow the ordinance and put in concrete and or asphalt? I bet it's way less than $5.5 million. So my point is, I don't know why we would go for gravel unless this is not a great deal for the property owner, and they're not recouping any of the funds from doing this transloading on their facility. So in my opinion, I don't know if I'm agreeing to allow the variance at this point, because to me, it seems like taking a lot of risk, especially for the property owner, as opposed to following the ordinance as it was written and using concrete and asphalt.
Anybody else?
Nope, you all stole my thunder already.
That's things like that. Any other questions? Well,
I have an additional comment
Please.
to tag on to what Jake had said. Excuse me, there's one point here that says, as this is presently only a temporary commitment by the Ann Arbor Railroad and their tenant, holding the owner to the requirement of asphalt or concrete pavement exceeds the owner's ability to yield a reasonable return. Do we make variances for financial gain? What's a reasonable return? Because we're making a variance. My other question that tags on that, where does the Ann Arbor Railroad track go from there into Toledo?
With the trucks?
No,
Oh,
with the train.
I'm not 100% sure.
Is it the area that goes underneath Alexis Road, where all the railroad yards are along 280? There's got to be a spur down there.
I can answer that. So back to my transportation days years ago.
Good
It
man.
does, Ann Arbor Railroad does connect. There's that large Canadian National Terminal right next to I-75.
Yep.
By Jeep, it connects there and terminals into that spur there. But, and then from there, obviously, it goes northwest. But, I think if I was to give a hypothetical of what's going on here, You know, it's not unlike something I would have tried to have done back in my transportation days either, is avoid a price increase from my rail provider that's probably has a rail spur right up to my facility. That's probably what they're attempting to do here by utilizing the Ann Arbor Railroad.
I see.
That's what I would have done to try to avoid a price increase from the rail provider.
I never realized we had so many transportation experts on this board. Usually we're only interested in fences. Thank you both.
So I can try to address some of these if I can remember them all here, question-wise. Now, the arguments that I put in there, such as reasonable return and some of those other components, were me attempting to answer questions that I thought you might have to answer in a variance. In some townships, there's a 5-point list of those types of items. And one of them is, does it create a reasonable return or a burden on the property owner? That's always subjective because we don't know those return rates and all that kind of stuff. But it was just one of those 5 bullet points that had to be answered in those scenarios. So in an attempt to try to outthink the process here, I put some offering as to how that was looked at. And that was partly the discussion I had with the owners, that if they had a longer-term agreement, they wouldn't have any problems with this, but they're only able to get right now a 3-year commitment that could be extended to 5. And therefore, for their investment in putting the full drives in and such, which I don't know what prices they got for that or what they used to estimate it, it didn't work for them for the numbers. So that's why that argument was placed in there. As far as the safety standards, we are exploring those in preparation for site plan review. I don't have all the answers yet. We do know that we have enough site that if we had to do a containment ditch along the edge of either a paved or, to me, the containment issue is going to be there whether it's gravel or paved surface. And that's just going to have to be compliant with the EPA, Eagle, and your township requirements. So we've got the property to be able to, the containment we feel, because it's also a question, do we have to be able to contain the 10 tanker trucks or just the offload instance of a spill if it were to occur? In the pictures that we were looking at for other similar sites, we were not seeing any type of visible containment. On the trailers themselves, they had containment tanks where the hoses would go into to contain dripping, but I don't know for certain those regulations yet.
I may be able to, it's been a number of years since I've been out of the business, but I think that it's probably not the trucks on site, because I used to do like a lot of co-ops and things like that where you had to pump it into the tanks.
Yep.
The containment areas were strictly mounted around
Yep.
the storage bins, not the trucks themselves. I mean, you'd have trucks coming and going, you could never contain,
Yeah.
unless you had the whole property pretty much contained.
And there's, my understanding right now, there's no intent to offload and store on tanks on site. It's strictly a transfer station that they're looking at. And this was the closest one to that facility that was available, so that's where the discussions occurred with the property owner.
What's the length of that pad? Is it a rail car's length or a couple rail cars?
Concrete,
The existing one,
existing concrete?
it's about 4 car lengths, probably rail car lengths.
4 car?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're probably looking 2 to 250 feet then,
I think that's what was stated to the planning department, was about 250.
because the cars usually run anywhere from 60 to 80 feet.
Is that where the offload will be actually conducted at? on
No,
that
the
concrete?
offload, they'll pull in the 10 cars, and they'll just go down the line, and then pull out the 10 cars from there, is what we understand. So they'll utilize that whole pad to drive on, similar to the photos that you were seeing there. My understanding is that concrete pad still is used, so there'll still be some offloading from the gypsum products that come in there, so they'll still be actively utilizing that on occasion, similar to they do now.
Any other questions or any other details you want to share? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
No, kind of going back to your comment, for the planning team, of course, to take a look, or not for the planning, for the planning commission, but, just thinking about the switching of cars in and out of here, they're gonna put 10 in, they're gonna try to take 10 out. I'm just thinking about how they might tie up Crabb Road, we get a lot of complaints for companies out there on Lavoy Road of getting blocked in by railroads. Wouldn't want to create another situation, but that's something for the planning team to commission, or the planning commission to think about when they're looking at the plans.
Good point.
One more question. Do we know at what point they'd exercise the option to extend to 5 years in that first 3 years? Is it 12 months, 24 months? Do they know?
I don't know that, but we can find that out as part of site plan review, and especially if it ties into a 3-year, because I would think that would have to go into their commitment with the tenant and the railroad as well. But my understanding, it was more at the latter end than the forward end of the agreement.
If there's no more discussion, I'll entertain a motion. Ready?
You're staring at me.
Well, you're writing like crazy, so we figure that you're the man with the plan as far as making a motion.
All righty. Well, maybe if you can read it. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. I make a motion to grant a variance approval for a gravel driveway maneuvering pad along the Ann Arbor Railroad spur at 7177 Crabb Road, Temperance, Michigan, 48182 on parcel 5802-035-001-10. And with these comments, and restrictions. And if I've left anything out or need to be added to, friendly amendments are definitely welcome. The applicant has stated they wish to unload approximately 10 rail cars per day with crude oil. So this variance would be strictly for a crude oil offload station only, no other product that falls into this particular variance. The railroad or entity in control would also have to provide any necessary SDS, safety data sheets, as required. They would also have to have an emergency spill number such as Chemtrec or whatever the regulatory agency is that would be followed for this particular item in case of a spill. The area must have a containment ditch, and I'm not going to give a per gallon amount. I think that should be reviewed probably within the planning review, because I know that there is a per gallon for containment centers. So say if you've got 10,000 gallons, you may have to have an area that'll hold 20 or whatever. So that'll be part of the planning and site plan review. Must go through a full site plan review and approval through the Planning Commission. There is a practical difficulty of not being allowed to place a hard surface on the property due to the railroad standards. All agencies that have jurisdiction under planning and any other emergency or review boards that have jurisdiction also should make approvals through the Planning Commission. There should be a wheel wash station to ensure no debris is carried out onto the main roadways. Due to the weight of these trucks, probably hitting max capacity of around 80,000 pounds upon exit, it will be reviewed and their responsibility that if they do not use the driveway and they start to break down the edges of Crabb Road, they will be responsible for the repairs. And my recommendation is a 3-year temporary with annual inspections by fire, emergency services, and Bedford Township Planning Commission, or any authority as designated by Bedford Township. The 3-year can be extended in 1-year increments into the 4th year, and then again into the 5th year for a final year. After 5 years, they must return for a permanent solution to the property of a solid surface. And again, that would be reviewed by all agencies and all Bedford Township entities such as, again, fire, emergency, planning, etc.
We have a motion. Do we have support? Or any friendly amendments?
Just as an FYI, and don't do this because I said it, but you can second for a discussion, but still don't have to vote yes in the voting process. But if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that either.
Then I'll second it. Any discussion? You covered an awful lot, Rick. Good job. Well, I share some of the concerns that have been mentioned, but when I second that, I also support it. I think makes Bedford more available for more and more things, and I'm a businessman, so that makes any difference to you guys.
One of the last comments I'll make too, Mr. Welling, is the fact that I trust in our local departments within Bedford Township, our local agencies, that they will cover anything in here that I may have missed from that standpoint. I think I've probably covered almost everything. I know there's probably something in there that is beyond my expertise, but I think I've covered it fairly well. So if there's no other comments, I'll call the question.
Okay, then, let's take a roll vote.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Mr. Zebeck?
No.
Mr. Lake?
No.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Motion
It
carried.
passes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll look to the audience for public comment. Okay, that's done. So now we'll go to the board and staff comments, and we'll start with you again, Karen.
We, because we are closed on the 11th in observance of Veterans Day, the deadline for the BZA will be Friday. And we have had a little bit of interest, but we're not yet certain if we will have a meeting in December because we haven't received any applications.
Thank you. Mr. Goldsmith.
Nothing, thank you.
Fuller.
I have nothing.
Jody.
I have nothing, thank you.
Mr. Steiner.
I'm good, thank you.
Nothing.
I'm good.
Nothing additional.
Well, good, that gets me to my part. My comment is that if there's no objections, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.